Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Deep Dive, where we dive deep into the music of Marty Friedman. Today we are looking at Song for an Eternal Child, which is the second track off of his latest album, Drama. Part 1 will be all about harmony, Part 2 will be all about melody, and Part 3 will be all about technique. Now, those of you who are familiar with deep dives know that I like to do this categorization of chords, but I'm going to show it here too because I want everybody to be on board. So, first of all, I'm going to write down the key that we're in. We are in E major, and I'm going to write down the notes of E major. So this is the E major scale. And then it would start over, right? So it would look like this. Now, another way to look at this analytically is just marking them down like this. This is a common way we like to analyze music, using the major scale as a basis for our analysis. For instance, if we wanted a minor scale, then we would just put markings like these in there and change the notes accordingly, meaning that this would be our natural minor scale. I'm going to categorize building chords into 3 different categories. The first category is building chords using the main scale, which is, in this case, the E major scale. Okay? And how that works is, for instance, if we want a chord that starts on the 1, which is the E, then we take that note, we skip one note, and take the next note again. Now this is what is called an E major triad, and it has the 1, 3, and the 5. A triad means a chord with 3 notes. So this would be called simply E major, but we can also call it a 1 chord because it starts on the 1. The same thing applies to every single note of the scale. For instance, if we start on the 2, then we do the same thing here. Okay, now these notes to the F sharp, these are again the 1, 3, 5, because this time we're starting from this. Okay, now this chord would be called an F sharp minor because the distance between F sharp and A is a minor third. But this is the first way of building chords, and we can use that for every single note in the major scale. And it's how most music is made. Now, the second way that we can use is building chords from some other scale. One common thing, for instance, is that we can take a chord that starts on the 4. Okay, now that has the notes A, C sharp, and E. And that is an A major chord. In the key of E major, the chord A major is a 4 chord. But what we commonly see, for instance, in Marty's music and in a lot of other music, is a 4 minor chord. And what that is instead of the C sharp, we are using a C note. We can call it a C natural because it really emphasizes on the fact that it is the plain C. It's not sharp. So C natural. Now these make up an A minor chord, and this note is not in the scale. But this can be thought of as borrowing from the E minor scale. So what we can do is we can build chords that use other scales. In this instance, we are using the E minor scale. We can do the same thing for a bunch of chords and all kinds of different scales. So the third way of building chords is chords that take us somewhere. What they do is they have a job to do. Their job is to create tension that pulls us into the next place. The most common pull that we have is a 5-2-1. A 5 chord pulls us nicely to the 1 chord. So in this case, it's a B major going to an E major. Or if we really want to emphasize that, we can actually make it a B7, turning this chord into a 4-note chord, which would then be this jumping over here, right? And this would be a B7, and it takes us nicely into the 1. Now the thing is that when you're shooting for the 1 chord, you can find the 5 in the E major scale. However, if we want to create tension for the 2 chord, for instance, then we can play the 5 of that chord. And the 5 of that chord means that we take the same interval. So from 5 to 1, meaning that we take this, that takes us there. And it's always the same interval, a 5th, and we make it a dominant chord, meaning a C sharp dominant 7. Now this chord has notes that look like this. Now some of these notes are in the major scale, and some of these notes are not in the E major scale. However, we're not that worried about whether or not they're in the scale or not. The point is that we have a nice pull that takes us right into the 2 chord. This is something that happens a lot in a lot of music, but Marty likes to use it a lot as well. So those are the 3 main categories of building chords. Then there's the other thing about chords. If we think about these 3 ways as kind of main ingredients of food, like, I don't know, pasta, potatoes, and rice, or something like that, then these other things can be thought of as spices that go into these chords. And these things can be stuff like add 9. They can be stuff like inversions. They can be things like extending chords. They can be stuff like suspended chords. Many things that we'll get to all in this song. But I want you to keep in mind that all these things are added spices into these 3 categories. And those spices can exist regardless of what category they are in. I hope that clears stuff up and shows you what to expect in a song like this. But yeah, let's get started and see what happens. Song for an Eternal Child. The main theme starts in E major. The first is just what we call a 1 chord, as I explained before, right? So E major. We can call that a 1 chord. It's pretty simple, right? Now, the next one already takes us a bit deeper. This is an F sharp minor add 9 chord. First, we're going to look at the category that we talked about before, and this is still right inside E major because it's the 2 chord. So analytically, this is just the 1 chord and a 2 chord. However, this has an added spice, and that is the add 9. Whenever there's the word add, it just means that we are adding some notes in. It can be an add 11, it can be a lot of things. But what that means is if the F sharp note itself is the 1, then the A note is the minor third of the chord, then the C sharp is the 5, then What would be next in a standard way of extending a chord would be a 7. However, we don't have that. We're actually skipping this and we're adding the next note in, which instead of the 8th, right, it would skip to the 9. Makes sense? 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. And that note is a G sharp. Now, if this was a chord that had all of these 5 notes, then it would be a 5-note chord that would be called an F sharp minor 9. However, that is not what we're doing. What we're doing is we have an F sharp minor triad and we are adding the 9. That's where the name comes from. When we're looking at notes over here, it is just this note. So it's right between the 1 and the 3 of the chord. And it always works the same way. Whenever there's an add 9, whether it's major or minor, it's always in between the 1 and the 3. Now the reason that it's an add 9 instead of an F sharp minor 9 is because they sound different. They have a different flavor to them. Sometimes an F sharp minor is a nice thing, and sometimes just the add 9 is a nice thing to have. The 7 in the chord adds a lot of flavor to the chord. That sometimes you want it, sometimes you don't. To me, the 7 in a chord like that adds a lot of peace to the sound. And sometimes you don't want that peace. But that's subjective, right? Okay, so we are 2 chords in. Let's look at the next chord. E with a G sharp in the bass. This, again, is just a 1 chord. However, we have this note as the lowest note that is played. And it feels different than having just a regular E major chord with the E in the bass. Functionally, it's the same chord. So, in the most simplistic form of looking at the song analytically right now, there's just a 1 chord, a 2 chord, a 1 chord, and a 2 chord. It's pretty simple, right? When you break it down, it's not that difficult to understand. It's just understanding where to break things down. Okay, next up is an A major add 9. So let's do the same thing. It is an A major, which means that it's the 4 chord. But we're adding the 9 again, which can be found here. Sometimes people like to call that add 2. That's fine. Either way works. Add 9 is a bit more common, I'd say. The reason that we use the number 9 there is because of the triadic structure that I showed earlier. So the 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. It keeps that triadic structure intact. So that's all it is. It's a 4 chord that has the 9 added in. Next is an E add 9 with a G sharp in the bass. You can probably tell where this is going. It's, again, just a 1 chord, but it has an inversion, meaning that it has a different note in the bass, and it has an add 9, so it has added 2 flavors in it. Then F sharp minor. Now it's just a regular 2 chord that doesn't have anything extra on it. And all of these things are a matter of taste. Sometimes it's very nice to add stuff in, and sometimes just having the triad is a nice thing too, because having a triad on its own has a specific kind of sound. And it's kind of to me, it's a bit of an angular sound. As soon as a chord gets extended, some of the angularity or the kind of classical feeling might go a bit away. At least that's my experience. Next up is a G sharp dominant 7 chord. This time we are in the 3rd category of building chords, which is chords that take us somewhere. A G sharp note is the 5th of a C sharp. Here, for instance, is a kind of a scale diagram. If we take the 4th fret of the A string, 1, 2, 3, 4, here is a C sharp. Now the 5th of a C sharp can be found here. For instance, if you have a power chord, you'll take it like this, right? But you can also find the same note over here. So this note is a G sharp. So if we have, and this goes for any note anywhere, if we have a note that's kind of a string below the target note, then we can always play a dominant of this chord. So what I mean is that we can have a G sharp 7 that takes us nicely into a C sharp. Whether that is minor or major, it doesn't matter. But the target is what is important. The same thing could happen for any note, any kind of target. For instance, here is a C. Now we could have a G7 that takes us nicely there. Same thing applies for any note. Okay, so what this means is that this is a chord that is taking us to a C sharp. And it does take us to C sharp. It actually takes us to a new key, which is the C sharp major. There's actually another name for it, that is D flat major. The reason I'm changing names here from C sharp to D flat is because since we're changing the key into that note, if we have C sharp major, then we would have to sharpen every single note in the scale, meaning that the notes would be C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp, and back to C sharp. And that can be a bit jarring to look at, especially when there comes chords that are again taking us somewhere else and the note names get pretty weird. But if we switch to D flat major, then we have a little less of that phenomenon happening. Okay, I'll show you what D flat major here looks like. So, D flat major. First note is D flat, E flat, F, G flat, A flat, B flat, and C. That's not so bad, right? Only 5 flats instead of 7 sharps. All right, so it's a bit of a rough key anyway to look at. However, we're not that worried about the note names per se, because we can still look at it analytically from this perspective. And that's what's important. See, our ears don't really hear D flat, F, A flat, and stuff like that. What our ear hears and feels is 1, 3, 5, stuff like that. And that's what we actually do in ear training. If you're into that stuff, we learn to hear what a 5 sounds and feels like. As you get more accustomed to doing ear training, then you can challenge your ear more to hear different things. I highly recommend getting into ear training. It really helps your musicianship. The next section, which is the violin section, we are in D flat, so that's the 1 chord, right? And then is an E flat minor 7 with the D flat in the bass. It's not as tough as it looks. All it is, again, it is just a chord using the first way of building chords, meaning that it's a 2 chord. So it's an E flat minor, but it has 2 spices added in, and that is, it's an E flat minor 7, meaning that it's a chord that is extended into a 4-note chord using the same way of skipping 1 note over. So now it's a 4-note chord called an E flat minor 7. And we also have an inversion of the chord, meaning that instead of the E flat itself, the 1 itself being on the bass, it actually has this note on the bass, the D flat. Now this would be called a third inversion, because this is the root position. This right here on the bass would be called a first inversion, and this on the bass would be called a second inversion. So this is called the third inversion, but it's still right in the D flat major scale. Next up is a bit of a different thing, that we have an A diminished 7 chord. Now this is something that's from the third way of building chords, and that is chords that take us somewhere. As I mentioned before, the most common chord that takes us somewhere is the 5 chord. But that's not the only chord. There are others, and the second most common is the diminished. So if the 5 likes to resolve from 5 to 1, like this, like there's a fifth interval apart, the diminished chord likes to, well, the diminished likes to resolve in many ways, but the most common way to resolve a diminished chord is to take it up a half step. In this case, for instance, we are going from A diminished 7 into a B flat minor. If we look at the B flat minor, it is the 6th of the D flat major. Makes sense? The B flat minor is a chord that's right in the scale. We just have a chord that takes us there, and instead of being the 5 of that chord, which would be an F7, we actually have a diminished chord that takes us to it, and that is the A diminished 7 chord. These are two different chords, the diminished 7 and the dominant 7, and we can use them for any chord that we want to go into. Let me show you what the notes inside of those look like. The notes in F7 are these. And let me show you the notes in A diminished 7th. This can also be written down like this. It means the same thing. The notes for A diminished 7 are this, 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 and this. And can you see how similar they are? They have most of the notes as the same. Dominant chords and diminished 7th chords are very interlinked because of this connection. Now we can use either one of these chords to take us to any chord in the world. Make sense? I hope it does. Now in this case, we have a diminished chord that is resolving up a half step into the 6th. Then we have something else, a minor 7 flat 5. We are again in the zone of the third category, meaning the chords that take us somewhere, but we are extending the idea a little bit, meaning that we have, instead of a single chord that takes us to one place, we actually have two chords that take us to one place. And that is looking like this. Again, we are targeting the B flat minor, just like the last time. Again, it's the 6th of the D flat major key. But this time we have two chords, and those are the C minor 7 flat 5 and the F7 flat 9 with an A in the bass. First, let's take these extra spices off. We don't need them right now. Let's just look at it like this. Just like I showed you before, this is a 5 that is going to the 6. Depending on where you're from, some people like to write this down with small Roman numerals because then it really emphasizes the fact that it's a minor chord. But back where I'm from, we can just write down a 6. And we expect you to know that a 6 in a major key is a minor chord. This is a 5 to a 6. What is this here? If we were in the key of B flat minor, then we would have these notes And the notes would be something like this. All that these two chords here are notes from this B flat minor key. We have the 5, that's taking us to the 1, that is the F7, right? And then we have the 2 chord of the B flat minor, and it's extended up into a 4-note chord. So all it is a 2, but it's a 2 from a different place. This cycle of chords here is a 2-5-1 chord progression that is targeting us into the 6. That's what it means. We can have a 2-5-1 that takes us anywhere. Just like we can have a 5-1 that takes us anywhere. Just like we can have diminished chords that take us anywhere. We can have a 2-5-1 that takes us to any chord. But in order to build those chords, you have to be kind of aware of the target that is happening. A simplified approach to that might help you is when we have a minor chord as a target, then this 2 chord here is a minor 7 flat 5 chord, and the 5 chord can be just a 5 chord like this. If this would be a major target, for instance, if the target is a 4, which in the key of D flat is a G flat, now this is a major chord, then these would be an A flat minor 7 and a D flat 7. This would be a common 2-5-1 progression into a major target. Already all of this is a lot to take in, I know, and I'm sorry. But that is kind of the thing in 2-5-1 progressions. And they are something that, for instance, jazz musicians study a whole lot, because these kind of things are at the very center of the world of jazz, for instance. But they happen a lot in Japanese music as well. And this too can be something that you learn to hear. A 2-5-1 to a 4 is a very recognizable, almost kind of a Japanese sound. That is something that you can just hear somewhere, and you don't even have to know the rest of the song. You don't have to know anything about the song, but immediately you can feel that, oh, whatever's going on there, that is a 2-5-1 to a 4. I know that sounds weird, but that is the way it works when you start working on your ear, is that you start to recognize these kind of things that go on. Okay, so a 2-5-1 to a 6. And the ingredients that happen to be as extra on the F7 are that it's an inversion, meaning that it has the third of the chord on the bass, so it's called the first inversion, and the extension, which is the flat 9. It has the notes F as the 1, A as the 3, C as the 5, then comes the 7 of the chord, which is an E flat, and then we have the flat 9 of the chord, which is a G flat. If it was just a regular 9, then it would be called a G, and this chord would be called an F9 chord. But that is not what's going on. We have a flat 9, meaning that it's a G flat. Ooh, we are really in the deep end here, aren't we? I hope I'm not losing you guys, but I hope you're getting something out of this. Next up, we are in B flat minor chord, so that's just the 6 again. Then it's the 6, but it's extended up into the 7th, and it actually has that 7 on the bass. So it's just an extended chord into a 4-note chord, and we have the third inversion in there. And what that does is nicely, the bass is then moving into a B flat minor. It goes down a whole step into an A flat, and then it goes down into the G. Now let's look at E flat major with the G in the bass. Now let's take the extra spice out. We don't need to look at this. Let's take the G out because it means just the first inversion, meaning that the third of the chord is in the bass. So we have an E flat chord, an E flat major. Normally the 2 chord would be a minor chord, but this time it's a major. There are a few ways to look at this chord, but right now I want to keep this simple, so I'll give you the most simple answer. What I would do right now is put this into the second category of building chords, meaning that we are using another scale. And that scale has, instead of the G flat, which would be a minor third, we have the G note, meaning that the 4 is 1 note sharper than before. So, analytically, this scale would then be called exactly the same major scale, except it would be marked down like this. Do you know what this scale is? This is called the Lydian. You can call it the Lydian mode. There's a bigger reason behind that. Modes are something that can be looked at from a bunch of different perspectives, but I want to keep it simple here. All that it is the major scale, but the 4 is a half step higher. And we can build chords using that scale just as fine. Okay, so what I would call this chord, that would be a 2 major, and it's borrowed from Lydian. Next chord is a G flat minor. Again, on its own, something like G flat minor might look really weird. Like, I don't know what a G flat even is. But let's look at our formula here again. All it is a chord that is built from the 4. Usually the 4 is a major chord, and in this case it is the minor. And this is something that we talked about at the start, right? This is a 4 minor chord that is borrowed from D flat minor. So we can have all these kind of different flavors from different scales and different modes and stuff like that, but we're still firmly in the key of D flat major. We're just adding different things in there. And don't you love the 4 minor? I mean, who doesn't love the 4 minor chord? I've always loved the 4 minor ever since I was a little kid. The 4 minor feels like a bittersweet memory that has both joy and sadness in it. But that's just me. However it feels for you, that's up to you, right? That's the beauty of music. It's a subjective experience for all. Next is a D flat major with an F in the bass. All it is you guessed it, is just the 1 chord first inversion. So the third of the chord is in the bass. Then we have an E diminished 7. And let's look where it's going. This time we're going down into an E flat. You see the bass motion there? F, E, E flat. D flat with an F, then an E diminished 7th, and then an E flat minor. It has this nice motion in the bass built right in. This is what we call chromatic movement. It's a nice motion that has a lot of pull in it. This is just the 1 chord, and this is just the 2 chord. All that this is just a diminished 7 chord that is going down, and it's going down a half step. That's one of the beauties of diminished chords, is that they can resolve in many different directions, and our ear really doesn't mind. One way to write this down would be a flat 3 diminished, because the note in this case is right between these 2. So that's why it would be called a flat 3 here. And it's a diminished that is built from the flat 3. But all it is just this nice motion that is taking us from one chord to another. And then the last chord of this section is an A flat 7, which is simply just the 5. So the very last two chords in this section are a 2 and a 5 for the D flat. This has to be going to the D flat, right? Because that would resolve the whole thing. But that's not the way life works. Just because we're setting up a resolution like that doesn't mean that's where we're going. What happens is we're actually launching right into the next section, which is in a different key. And we are back in E major. So let's write that down. Again, the formula of 1 to 7 remains the same. The notes have to be changed so that it fits the major scale. These 4 notes have to be sharpened, meaning that we take them up a half step. Because when we do this, then the major scale remains intact. And if you look at these 4 notes that are here, the F sharp, G sharp, C sharp, and D sharp, these are the exact same notes that we have over here. That thing right there. Those fall right in line with these notes. So the first one here is on the line of F. The second one here is on the C, this one's on the G, and this one's on the D. So what these key signature symbols mean is they show which notes should be altered. And in this case, we are altering 4 notes, and there are those. Let's start looking at this section. First chord is just a 1 again. Then the B major with the D sharp in the bass. It's a chord that is built from the 5, so it's just a 5 chord, and it has the D sharp in the bass, so it has the third of the chord in the bass, which means that again it's just a 5 chord, first inversion. Next chord is an A with the C sharp in the bass. It's the same thing, it's just a 4 chord with the third in the bass. Then it's E with a B in the bass. It's a 1 chord with the 5th of the chord in the bass, so it's a second inversion. A is the 4, E with the G sharp is the 1 chord first inversion again, F sharp minor is the 2, B is the 5, E is the 1, G sharp 7 is again a 5 that is taking us to the C sharp. And what do you know, we have the C sharp here, and it's the 6th of the E major key. Then we have this thing. Recognize what it is? That, my friends, is a cycle of chords that is taking us to the 4. So the target is the 4, and we have the 5 of the 4, which is this. And before that, we have the 2 of the 4. So it's 2, 5, 1 that is taking us to the 4. And this is what we talked about before. So if you want to hear what the 2, 5, 1 to a 4 sounds like, here's one place. The same phenomenon is in a lot of songs, but here's one instance where it happens in this song. So both of those chords, they don't go along with the E major scale. But that's fine. They don't have to go along with the E major scale because their job is to take us to the 4 in a nice and strong way. Next up is the A is the 4. The E with the G sharp in the bass is the 1 first inversion. C sharp is the 6. F sharp minor is the 2. B is the 5. B7 with an A in the bass is just the 5 again, but the bass is going down, and that's what's called the third inversion. Then there's a G and a B and an E. So what's going on? Let's look at it one by one. The B is the 5, the B7 with an A in the bass is the 5, the B again is the 5, and the E is the 1. all that's left as a question mark is this G right here. What is going on? That is, again, a chord that is borrowed from the minor scale. Compared to the major scale, it is analyzed like this. See what's going on? The notes are the same. I'm just altering the 3 notes so that it becomes the natural minor scale. And all that is going on is we are building the chords using this note. So 2 of these notes don't fit the E major scale, but that's okay. They don't have to, because this is something that we're just visiting another place for a while, and it's just another flavor again. As long as the melody isn't stepping over anything, it works just fine. There's another name for all this borrowing from another scales kind of thing, and that is called modal interchange. We've covered that name before, but what it means is we use chords from other modes and other scales. It's pretty simple, right? So modal interchange is the name of this chord building method. The next chord is a G#7, and this is a chord we've seen before, right? Again, it's taking us to the C#. The same thing is happening. We are shifting to the D flat. So let me write that down here again. Okay. And let's go and check out the chords. This is the cute lullaby section of the song that I really love. D flat, it's just a 1. A flat with a C in the bass, it's a 5, first inversion. Makes sense. The same thing is going on. There's the A flat, which is the 5, and it has the third of the chord in the bass. Then the same thing, 1, 5, first inversion. Again, the same thing. Then we're starting to get something different. Remember how earlier had the diminished going down? Well, this time we're going back up. So we have D flat, D diminished 7, and an E flat minor. Now this is just the 1 chord, and this is just the 2 chord. And here's this. And it's just a chord that is in between the 1 and the 2. And it's a diminished chord going up a half step. So we can write it down like this, for instance. That's one way. That might look silly to some, so we can write it down as this too. It's fine. Either way works. Next up is the A flat, which is just the 5. E flat minor 2. A flat is the 5, first inversion. E flat 2, 5, 2. Then the same kind of thing is going on, right? An E flat, an E, and an F for the bass. So the same kind of motion is going on. E flat minor, E diminished 7, D flat with an F in the bass. Again, is just a 2, and this is just a 1. It happens to be a first inversion, and this is a diminished chord going up a half step. Now this time the target happens to be the F, but it works the same way just as fine. Now all these diminished chords in between do is create this nice little momentary tension that pulls us deeper and more strongly into the next chord. They might be a bit jarring at first because when you start to use stuff like this, it's kind of tough to know where to go with them. But once you're accustomed to using them, then they're not as scary. And this is something that Marty is obviously very good at. Okay, so D flat with an F in the bass is the first inversion of the 1 chord. Then D flat with an A flat in the bass is again a 1 chord, but the second inversion. 1, 5, 1. A flat with an E flat in the bass is just the 5, but it has the 5 of the chord in the bass. So second inversion. D flat, 1, D diminished, go into the 2, right? A flat is the 5, 2, 5, 1. The same motion, 2, 5, and 1 again. Ain't that nice? So the chord symbols might be something that you're not accustomed to seeing, but the function of the chords isn't all that out there. They're pretty straightforward in what they do. It's just that sometimes different kind of keys can be a bit tough to look at when you're not used to looking at keys like that. Next section is where the band comes in, and we are shifting keys into D major. So we're just hitting the D major and the D major 7. So all that the rhythm guitar is doing is just playing the D power chord like this, right? But then we're just shifting this note into here. And this is what makes it a D major 7. So there's a constant motion in between these two chords here. And analytically, these notes are just a 1. This is the 5. Here is the 1, and here's the major 7. There is no third, but the third is implied by the melody. So it's a very clear D major that is going on. Now, let's write down D major. So it only has 2 sharps. Okay, so the chords are, this is just the 1. We are extending it to a 4-note chord, but it's still just a 1. B minor 7 is just a 4-note extension of the 6th chord. F sharp minor is the 3. E minor 7 is the 2 chord extended into a 4-note chord. G with an A in the bass. This is something that we looked at in Illumination as well. This is a bit of a different chord in that this is not a G-based chord, as you might think it is. This is actually an A-based chord. Sometimes people refer to chords like these as slash chords, but the definition of slash chord isn't all that set in stone. It's a bit of a gray area in what it means. But what is happening here is we have an A in the bass, and the upper structure of the chord is the G. So what it looks like is this. We have the A in the bass, and the upper structure of the chord is like this. Now obviously this doesn't sound like it looks here because the A is way lower. There's another name that some people like to use for this, and it is called the A11 chord. Now this is something that kind of depends on where you're from, to be honest. 11 chord is something that maybe is used a bit more in America. The G with an A in the bass is a bit more describing of the sound of the chord, and some places in the world use this kind of marking for it. Maybe you've seen something like this. Whatever it is, we're talking about the same thing. These different kinds of ways essentially mean the same thing. What it means is that it is an A dominant chord. Essentially, it is an A dominant 7 chord, but it has some extra flavor on top, and the flavor is so much there that it gets kind of unclear as to what to call it. Sometimes these kind of chords, when it has this slash in between, sometimes they are called slash chords or upper structure chords. They have a lot of names, and stuff like this doesn't have a clear, standardized, set in stone way of calling them. Back in the school where I was, the theory teacher was adamant on the fact that this does not exist. But it depends on where you're from and who you're talking to. We're talking about the same thing. So this right here is what the rhythm guitar is doing. Okay, so it has the A in the bass pretty clearly, and it has the G major triad on top. So here it's pretty clear on what the chord is. It's just that the function of the chord is something that needs to be kind of explored. But what it is an A-based chord. I'll show it to you on the diagram here. Here is the G major triad, and here we are playing the A. We can also play the same A over here as well, and this is something that can actually become a movable shape, right? So this is the kind of shape that you can try out for yourself on a dominant chord and see what it feels like. Sometimes it fits nicely, sometimes it's kind of weird, and it's a new flavor. It's a different kind of flavor that you can try and use for yourself. So that is that chord. Now, next chord is this right here, is just the 2 chord. 1 chord, first inversion. G major is just the 4 chord. E major with a G sharp in the bass is something that is taking us to A, right? It doesn't mean that we always have to play every single note of the E dominant 7 chord. We can just play an E major triad and it works. But as you can maybe see, this is the same kind of situation that we talked about before, where I said it was a Lydian chord. Now this is another way to analyze the same chord, and it depends on the context. And sometimes the context can be a bit of a gray area. And what is going on here is that we're pretty clearly going in to the A. And if we look at the bass motion here, we have F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B. It is a lot of motion in there. So in this context, I would call this a 5 to a 5, meaning a dominant chord, first inversion that is taking us to the 5. And the 5 is the A. Then instead of the 5 itself, we have an A still in the bass, but it's a 1 second inversion. Then an A sharp diminished 7. Let's see where it's going. It's going to a B minor. And B minor is the 6. And you guess it, A sharp diminished 7 is again a diminished chord that is resolving up a half step. Okay, and the B minor is the 6. B flat major. What is this? This right here is another type of modal interchange, and we are again borrowing from D minor. This time we're building a chord based off of this, and the notes for this are B flat, D, and F. It's a bit of a surprise chord that's going on in there. But as you can see, it kind of takes part in the bass motion in a way. So there's F sharp, G, going up a half step, G sharp, A sharp, B minor. Then all of a sudden we're going down a half step to a B flat major. It's a pretty surprising sound. But it's not that outside, it's just from the D minor. Then we are back in the D major. B minor is the 6. E flat. What is this? Going into E. What is going on? In this context, I'm going to call it a major chord that resolves up a half step. So the target is E major, and all we are doing is just playing the same exact chord a half step lower. That works fine too. And that's something that you can hear in kind of early rock and roll, for instance, you know, like Tutti Frutti and songs like that. It's just taking the same shape and putting it down a half step and just giving it a little bit of tension before taking us to the actual chord. Makes sense? I hope it does. That's one way to analyze this. I could give you other kinds of modal interchange analysis ways, but in this context, this is the most effective way to look at this chord, because it's kind of the same thing that's going on in the melody too, but we'll get to that in the melody part. Then there's the E major, and that is a 2 major chord again. This time it's not in a kind of chordal moment of the song, so I would analyze it as a Lydian modal interchange chord again. Normally a 2 chord would be a minor, but here we have to sharpen the 4 to get it into a major chord. And the major scale with a sharp 4 is called a Lydian. Let's keep going. G is the 4 chord, and G minor major 7. A 4 chord again, but it's a minor, and we are extending the chord into a 4-note chord. A minor 7 chord has a formula like this. It's a pretty round, unoffensive sound. The only difference between these 2 chords is this one interval, and it's the 7. So this is called the major 7. Sound-wise, these 2 chords are pretty different. This is a chord that you don't hear as much, but the reason why it works here in this context is because we're on the 4. And as I said before, who doesn't love the 4 minor, right? Now, if we used only the D natural minor, then we would have these notes. And if we build a chord with the natural minor, we get the minor 4 just fine. However, this is the 7th now. And this gives us the G minor 7. However, what we're doing here is something different. Remember how when we get the 4 minor, the only note that is altered in the chord tones is just this right here. This G is in both scales, major and minor. The D, obviously, is in both major and minor. The only difference between the 2 scales is the flat 6. Now, when we extend the chord, if we extend it up to the F here, which is the minor 7, then we're using another altered note. And we're going a bit further away from the D major. When we were using just the triad and we weren't using the F, we were just a 1 note away from the D major. Make sense? With this setup here, we're just 1 note away from the major. However, when we use this, now we are 2 notes away from the major scale. Makes sense? However, if we wanted to keep it so that this note does not alter, then we would have it like this. And this is the same note as here. Makes sense? So we're still using the same kind of logic here, in that we are inside the D major, but we're changing 1 note, and that is this flat 6. That is why this major 7 works so well here. Either one of the chords can be used, a minor 7 or a major 7, it's fine. But this keeps us a bit closer to the major, and we can use this kind of harmony. In fact, we're not using the 7 here at all, so we can just keep on calling it this, right? Let's remove all these markings here. So we are altering 1 note so that we can use this kind of harmony here. This scale here is almost the major scale, right? But it has, again, just one note altered that we can use different kind of harmony, which is this right here. This is called harmonic major. Oh yeah. Now either chord works just as fine. Minor 7 works well, and the minor major 7 works fine too. Both sound very nice. So what that means is that when we're playing a G minor, which is the 4 minor here, we can choose to extend the chord in different ways, and that's our choice in what kind of sound we're looking for. We can go the minor 7 route, which is a more outside of the major key. Or we can go the minor major 7 route, which is more inside the D major key. Either way works, and examples of both can be found. Here is an example of the G minor major 7. One example of the use of minor 7 is, for instance, in the song Don't Look Back in Anger by Oasis. In that song, we are in C major, and the chord that is a 4 minor is then an F minor. And at the very end, you can hear that the guitar is playing an F minor 7 chord voicing. Okay, so both sounds do work, and there's nothing wrong with either one. It's just a matter of taste. Okay, so that's a long explanation of stuff like this, but it's a deep dive. Okay, then comes F sharp minor, which is just a 3, then a B7 flat 9. What this is a chord that is going somewhere again, and a B7 is the 5 of, you guessed it, E minor. So it's the 5 of the 2. And I'll show you the extension again. So a B7 would be these notes: 1, 3, 5, flat 7. So that's a B, D sharp, F sharp, and A. Now that we have B7 with the flat 9 added in, then it's the same formula, but we have the flat 9. So the notes are here the same. Only thing that is different is the very last note, which is that. But again, this is just some more flavor that is added into the dominant chord. Let's keep going. E minor is the 2, and A7, flat 9, sharp 5 with the B flat in the bass. What is going on? Well, at first I'll show you what the rhythm guitar is doing. So what's going on here is the rhythm guitar is playing an A major chord like this, except for this note. Okay? If this note was here, then this would be just an A major chord, right? However, we're adding this note, which happens to be the flat 9. Since this is already a 5 chord that is going to the D major, we can already from this information surmise this much. Now for the sharp 5 and the B flat, well, the bass is playing a B flat very clearly. That's a 5-string bass there, and it's playing a lowest B flat it can find. So that gives us this. That's already a pretty dissonant chord, But it's a 5 chord that is taking us to 1. And since having that pull is what it's all about, that we can add spice to that pull. But the thing is that there's also a keyboard that is playing a B flat minor chord. And if you want to play a high B flat minor chord on a guitar, that would look like this here. Those are the notes of a B flat minor. So add that in with these, and there's a lot going on. So you could argue that it's a sharp 5. Some might call this, instead of a sharp 5, they might call it a flat 6. It's the same note. Either way is fine. But the point of the thing is that we have a lot of dissonance on the 5, which is the A. And that's why the name of the chord is such a jarringly strange one. Also, the melody is hitting a low B flat and an F. And those are these notes here. So a lot of dissonance for a very dissonant A7 chord. The rest is all just spices. After that, we keep going, and it's again our D major business. Then we have a break with the band because the solo guitar takes this launch into the solo in a very cool way. And then we change keys again. This time we're changing to a key that has a single flat note, and that is an F major. Again, the formula remains the same, but in order to get a major scale starting from the F note, we have to flatten the B note into a B flat. Okay, but it's all the same stuff again. So B flat is a 4 and the F is a 1 chord. B flat 4, F is the 1, B flat 4, C is the 5, 1 and the 5, first inversion, D minor is the 6, well the A would be the 3, but instead it's giving us some new tension. Normally the 3 would be a minor chord, but in this case it's kind of shifting our focus here in a way. Let's look at what's going on around it. Right before that is a D minor, so we could look at this as being a 5 to the D minor, but it's working the other way around. And after that we get a B kind of chord. So this chord actually has kind of two functions. It's not that jarring for our ear because we can hear it as a 5 to this chord. So it almost feels a bit familiar because here it is a 5 to a 6. However, when we keep going, it's actually interlinked with this chord, which is interlinked with this chord, which is interlinked with this chord. What is here is a new key, which is the E major, and the B is a 5 to the E. And the sus4 is just a way to elongate the chord a little bit. And what the A is in the key of E major. This is the 4. So instead of a 2-5-1, we have a 4-5-1 going into a new key. So that's the way it works. Let's look at the sus4 chord. I'll write down this stuff again. Here is the formula for a dominant 7 chord. Here are the notes that fit that formula. And what happens in the sus chord, I'm writing down the 7, but it doesn't really matter. You can think of this in a triad or in a 4-note chord. It's the same function. Is that instead of the 3, we are suspending the 3. That's where the name comes from. It's a suspended chord. There is suspension. Instead of having the 3, if the 3 is here, we're actually over here, and we are about to go into the 3. So that's what's going on here in the chord. It's a sus4 at first, then it resolves down to a regular triad chord. Now, sus chords can work in minor and major keys. And over there is actually, it's specified that it's a 4 because the suspension can work in both ways. It can also be a 2 that is going to a 3, or it can be a 4 that is going to a 3. Either one works, and you can use them both kind of interchangeably, but the sus4 is a lot more common. It works nicely in a lot of dominant 7 contexts, whereas the sus2 doesn't always work that well. So that's what's going on. It's a 4-5 that's taking us to E major. And once we get to the E major chord and the E major key, then we are back in the main theme. And what is going on here is we have essentially the same chords as we did at the very start of the song, at the main theme. However, this time we have a rhythm guitar that is playing the chords as well, giving us a bit more insight into what's going on. At the start, there was just a piano and guitar. The piano played very few notes, giving us pretty clearly what the chords were back in the intro. However, here the rhythm guitar is elaborating on the chords a bit. So here's what's going on with the rhythm guitar. Check this out. We just have the E major here. Now, when we go into the F sharp minor, instead of the regular bar chord, we're playing this. We are leaving the top 2 strings open. Now, that's a sound that all of us guitar players love, right? One place where you can hear a sound like that, where the chords are changing around, but the top 2 strings remain open, is The Blower's Daughter by Damien Rice. And he's using it a lot. Now I like to grab this chord like this so that I can get even the lowest note. But when you're playing in the studio and the bass player is already playing the lowest note, then you don't have to do this. You can just grab it like this. That's fine. It makes it a lot more movable. But I like to grab the lowest note here as well. So that's what's going on. In order to write down what these chords are, you have to get a bit more elaborate. So what's going on here is the high E string is making this an F sharp minor 7. So that is extending the chord into a 4-note chord. However, the open B string is an 11 to the F sharp. You can also call it a 4, but again we have this triadic structure that we like to use. In this case it looks like this: 1 flat 3, 5 flat 7. We're not playing the 9, but we're playing the 11. Okay? That's why it's called a minor 7 add 11, because we're not using the 9. So it's an elaborate name, but that's because we're using the open strings that makes the chord so elaborate. So the notes are F sharp, A, C sharp, E, and here's the B. Now the next chord is a bit of a same deal. In the intro, there was very clearly an E major with the G sharp in the bass. Because there was only piano playing the chord, it was pretty self-explanatory in how that chord worked. However, here we have a chord like this. Now, what's going on here is, from a guitar player's perspective, we are playing the G sharp minor and we're playing the top two open strings. The open B is just the same as the note before, so it's just the minor third. However, the top E string, this is a flat 6 to the chord. So you can call this a G sharp minor with a flat 6 on top. This also has the same notes as an E major 7. So you could say that this is an E major 7 with a G sharp in the bass, making it the first inversion. However, because the chord grip of the guitar is such a dominant thing over here, in my opinion, I'm gonna call it a G sharp minor with that flat 6. So that's what's going on here. So what the rhythm guitar here is doing, the whole thing is this. That's a great sound, right? Using the open strings is a wonderful way to add spice to your chords. Okay, so let's keep going. That's what's going on with the rhythm guitar there. Then we're on the A major, which in E major is just a 4. The one with the first inversion. C sharp minor is the 6. F sharp minor is the 2. 1, 5, bass going down, inversion. 1, first inversion. 4, going up chromatically, a diminished, going up into a 1, second inversion, so it has to be in the bass, but the bass movement is again working nicely, right? A sharp, B. Then comes a C diminished. Okay, again the movement is continuing. A sharp, B, C. Where are we going? Going up into a C sharp minor. So again, the same thing. A diminished in between these two chords, just giving more motion. C sharp minor is the 6. A minor 6 with a C in the bass. Now here is a chord that can be looked at in a few different ways. I look at this as a 4 minor, first inversion. We have simply extended the chord into a 4-note chord again. So we have an A, we have extended it up like so. So we have altered the 6 again. And then we are extending it over here. So that's the way a 6 chord works. We can do that for a minor or a major. It doesn't matter. What happens is the formula looks like this. In an A minor, the notes then would be these. Now, as I said, this is a chord that can be looked at in a few different ways, but looking at the melody and looking at what all the instruments are doing, this is the conclusion that I came to. Let's keep going. Then comes an E with the B in the bass, so a 1, second inversion. Then comes something a bit different, a B diminished, going into a kind of B dominant movement. So what is going on here? Let us look at the rhythm guitar again. So the first chord is this, which is an E with the B in the bass. After that, we are turning it into this chord instead of that, and this becomes a B diminished. Makes sense? Then the rhythm guitar goes up yet again, and it goes into this moment. The reason that I've written down a sus4 and a sus4 with an A in the bass is because I'm taking into consideration what the entire arrangement is doing. But that's what the motion here is within this B moment. So before, there was a lot of bass movement going half steps, but this time the bass is staying still, while this note here is changing all around. So a B diminished going into a B sus4, that's why it worked, because of the motion of the note. So a B sus4, which kind of resolves the same way as before, where we had the flat 3 and then the B. Remember? So it's the same kind of thing that was going on before. Then we get to the outro. And here we are still inside E major. We're just starting from a different chord. So we're starting on the 6. Then we go into the 4, but we're adding the 9 again, remember? G sharp minor is the 3. A C with the G in the bass going into E. So just before we hit the final 1 of the entire song, we have a bit of modal interchange again, meaning the second way of building the chords, and we're borrowing from E minor. So what we're doing is we're building a chord from this we're building a chord from the flat 6. So this is a flat 6 chord, second inversion. The final E chord, that is it. What a journey. What an amazing journey this song is. So there was a lot to go over, and hopefully it wasn't that tough to understand. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them and help out in understanding this stuff the best I can. But yeah, that's the way the song's harmony goes. If you like to support what I do, you can find me on Patreon. Big thanks to all my supporters there. And see you on part 2. Thanks.